Our first speaker that I'll introduce today is Adam B. Levine. Adam has been exploring, chronicling, and inspiring the world of Bitcoin and non-currency tokens since 2011. And there he is. Hi, Adam.
Okay.
Adam is a serial entrepreneur, managing editor of podcasts at CoinDesk, CEO at Tokenly, which I know he'll tell us a little bit about in a minute. And he's also the creator of a long-running, a long-running Bitcoin podcast, it's called Speaking of Bitcoin, and it was formerly called Let's Talk Bitcoin. So Adam, welcome to the show. And if I missed anything super critical there that we need to know about you, why don't you fill us in and tell us what moves you, what brings you here to this world of NFTs?
Sure. So I came to cryptocurrency because I am like an early technologist, typically a journalist in spaces where journalists sort of dare not tread in the very early days of things. I've been doing podcasts as sort of my native format and building podcast networks since 2005. And basically, I'm here because technology in an abstract sense is nice, but technology in practice in ways that actually empower people to have more better choices in their lives is empowering in ways that are hard to match in really any other area. And so my firm belief for a long time has been that given better choices, people make better choices. And I see technology as the way to do that. And I see Bitcoin and blockchains and tokens and sort of these new types of ownership systems as fundamentally game-changing technologies that offer that in ways that, again, are hard to match really anywhere else. And that's why I've been here, and that's why I continue to be here, even after a long time.
Speaks to me because I've got a massive transformative purpose, which is a phrase from the ExO world, to empower people with technology. It's something I've been doing since I was a little kid, and I can't really stop. So I really appreciate that and what you're doing there. And I will come back in a little bit to this concept of fundamentally game-changing tech. In particular, we'll probably talk a little bit about NFTs today. Before I do that, I want to bring Kaliya over. So Kaliya Young is widely known as Identity Woman and an independent advocate for the rights and dignity of our digital selves. In 2005, she co-founded the Internet Identity Workshop, and in 2021, she co-founded the Thoughtful Biometrics Workshop. Kaliya works to build a multi-stakeholder collaborations to solve hard techno-social challenges in community. She's the author of 2 books, Domains of Identity, and a comprehensive guide to self-sovereign identity. Those were 2020 and 2018 respectively, so go check out Kaliya's books. Along with lots of articles, she has received a Master's of Science in Identity Management and Security from the University of Texas at Austin, and is an instructor in computer information systems at Merritt College in Oakland. And I've known Kaliya for several years now. Kaliya, you were one of the original influencers on how we set up the ExO economy as a complementary currency from a meal at a diner, I think in Miami at some point in the past. And we've been talking ever since, and our topics have ranged all the way from identity and tokens and blockchains to permaculture and the environment and carbon sequestration. So I've always enjoyed that. And welcome to the show, Kaliya. It's really lovely to have you today.
Thanks so much, Ken. It's great to be here with you.
So did I miss anything you'd like to tell kind of this audience as we get started, what it is that moves you these days and what you're thinking about identity and any of the related things around cryptocurrencies?
Sure. I mean, yeah, my center of gravity, as my bio stated, has been around these questions around digital identity and digital representation of ourselves. And I've facilitated a community on a quest to solve this problem. It's actually technically fairly challenging to have people be the center of their own digital representations and not be sort of at the affect of other identity or identifier systems that are placed on us. And how do we get our own center? And I love the term from the community, the massive transformative purpose. I've been on this mission to really support the emergence of a new layer of the internet for identity for people, bonus things, and organizations come with that in ways that can be empowering. I don't think these systems by default are empowering unless we really push to make them that way, and unless we for push the underlying architectures to allow for that, but then that's not enough. We also have to like figure out how the business processes and the resulting end user experience and flow of information still is empowering 10 years later, right? Like it's not just the tech alone isn't enough. We also have to shape the cultural norms and the legal norms and the business processes and systems that come with these new tools that radically shake up how things happen today.
Okay. So I think we're going to have lots of fun things to talk about today. I've got a few little notes here. I'm going to bring on Salim in just a moment. He has magically appeared backstage. So give me just a second on that, team. And I want to remind everybody that from a format perspective, Adam, I'll be giving you about 5 minutes completely of your own to talk about whatever you want to tell us that's hot and amazing and something that I hope really thought-provoking for us. And Kaliya, you'll get the same as well. We'll be giving you about 5 minutes just afterwards. We'll probably talk a little bit in between, and then we'll move to more of a panel format where all of us we'll discuss the things that we've talked about today. And if we have questions, which I really hope we do from the audience out there, we'll try to address those as well. Sound good? Okay, awesome. So also backstage, we have Salim Ismail. Salim Ismail is the co-founder and chairman at Open ExO. He is the co-founding, hopefully I get this right, co-founding executive director of Singularity University. He has been a serial and or parallel entrepreneur for probably most of his life, like a lot of us that are attracted to this community. And we are really happy to have Salim here today. And Salim has been doing a deep dive into the world of NFTs and may or may not share what he has seen and learned along the way as we go as my co-host on this panel. So Salim, welcome.
Great to be here.
Good to see you today. And as you can see, we have Adam and Kaliya, and I'm about to turn the microphone over to Adam to give us a few minutes on what he sees out there in the world and what he'd like to tell us. So Adam, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Kent. So I guess what's worth talking about in the context of kind of today's conversation is the intersection of NFTs and identity, which is something that I think we're seeing increasingly. Before I talk about that, let me talk about NFTs a little bit specifically. People right now are looking at sort of a second wave of NFTs. That's the first, call it early majority type wave, and we're not even really into early majority yet. The concept, if you break it down into the fundamental words, it's very simple. It's non-fungible tokens. It's a way to represent something on the internet in terms of who owns a thing that isn't cleanly exchangeable really for anything else that's out there, right? That represents something unique. And so if you think about it, the ability to track and transfer in a decentralized and robust way ownership of arbitrary stuff on the internet is an incredibly, incredibly powerful change in kind of human history, and something that was very much missing from the internet, which has led to it being developed in ways that have been very empowering in some ways. But to Kaliya's comments, that are not necessarily empowering over long periods of time and are not necessarily empowering at all. The technology has the capability to be empowering, but it needs to be used in ways that do that. So the reason why NFTs have been something that have been interesting to me from long before we called them NFTs is because when you add a neutral ownership layer to the internet, you get the ability to start to treat internet interactions, internet business relationships, pretty much everything in a way that's much more analogous to sort of the real world and much less like the internet that we've sort of come to know, where the lack of ability to track who owns really what stuff on the internet leads to things like systems like a transfer of a domain name, which is basically, if you wanted to take that into real world terms, it's like, I have a domain name in my hand, you have money in your hand. I throw my domain name up into the air, you throw your money at me, and we both hope that we catch each other's, transfers at the same point. But if that doesn't happen, then there's lots of things that can go wrong. And so this leads to increased costs. This leads to third parties necessarily needing to be involved to conduct escrow and transactions. And it leads to relationships that are not direct relationships, where rather than reseller relationships as we have in the real world, we have affiliate relationships online, which means that as an affiliate, as opposed to a reseller, you are effectively a marketing arm of someone else's company, as opposed to potentially having your own company and having your own relationships, which is much more kind of like the real world context. So at a base technology layer, NFTs are an incredibly important innovation. Blockchains generally, but NFTs in terms of generalizing the singular ownership of like non classes of things, but individual objects. That's kind of where I see the most important elements of this. Now, this is something that today is being applied primarily in the arts, in the game space, and of course, amid a speculative mania that is driving up the price of anything. And to the extent that something isn't real, to the extent that it isn't tied to reality, is to the extent that it becomes easier for it to be speculated on in a way that is untethered from reality. So they've been performing pretty well, and cryptocurrency and different types of assets in general have been because of that sort of dynamic. It's not really about the technology, it's about the environment in which it's operating and kind of the differences that it presents to that. So the change I think we've seen specifically over, call it the last 6 months or perhaps 9 months at this point, is a move away from this point in the history of NFTs where people think about them as something that's pretty and towards something that's useful. And one of the primary areas, not intentionally, but inadvertently, that they've stumbled upon is actually the area of identity, where non-fungible tokens represent effectively the modern equivalent of a country club membership or a social club membership or something along those lines. And so being able to connect those dots to where you have something that is limited in quantity, that is unique to yourself, and that acts as an identifier for you in a variety of social contexts is something that is, to my knowledge, quite new and quite powerful in terms of the potential that it sort of lays out for all of these different areas. And it acts to a lesser extent as an enabling and organizing layer for organizations that typically would be reliant on centralized third parties because there simply wasn't any other way to do it, can now become distributed communities where you have ecosystems rather than individual platforms, and where ownership is a concept that goes beyond the company that has created the platform towards the people who make the platform valuable. I started my earliest experiments with these types of things. We did not do NFTs, we did rewards tokens in 2014 when I launched the first tokenized reward system, which was called LTB Coin at the time. That was, again, a very, very early experiment, and it's just amazing to see how far this stuff has come in the last 7 or 8 years, and even then to see how still early we are in this process. So I won't take up any more time, but that's kind of where I'm thinking about in terms of the intersection here is identity and NFTs are actually an incredibly powerful innovation that I think we're going to see over the next year to 18 months become an incredibly dominant concept within the space and probably quickly become overplayed, but still empowering.
Adam, that's fantastic. And just to sort of rattle off a couple of key things there, you mentioned domain names, right? So we've got the rise of ENS and unstoppable domains and other things like that, where the domains are actually NFTs.
Yes.
And this is very little known in my experience. People just do not know this is happening. And if you want a .DAO domain, you're going to go through unstoppable domains and you're going to buy an NFT for it. And they're taking a completely different approach, by the way, for how you secure your domain, being brand respectful. And I thought that was amazing when I saw that. So that's part of what you mentioned. I love the comment that you made. It's not about the technology. It's about the environment. I hope we get a chance to come back to that. I'll make a note because I'd love to talk about how the environment has changed, what context has shifted. NFTs as membership tokens, and particularly empowering for forms of organizations. In particular, you didn't mention it, but decentralized autonomous organizations is a no-brainer. I've been saying that if you sell NFTs in a collection on, say, OpenSea or anywhere, you just created a DAO, whether you realize it or not. And that's a funny thing that people haven't, I don't know about you, but I haven't quite seen it always click beyond the sale, right? To the fact that you just made a community and that community has actual power because of what they own. And then I didn't know that you launched that project in 2014. So that's awesome. That's new news. I'd love to hear some more about that sometime. So let's shift over and let's intersect with Kaliya's work. So let's bring Kaliya back. Remember, everybody, Kaliya Identity Woman is here, and Kaliya is an expert in and deeply experienced in digital identity. So Kaliya, you've heard Adam. We'd love to hear a few minutes from you, say take up to 5 minutes, and tell us what you're seeing on the edge of digital identity, maybe how it intersects with NFTs, and we'll go from there.
Sure. So I want to share 3 underlying or emerging protocols that, like NFTs, we'll see whether they burst out and people talk about them. But I'm hoping what the level of where this audience is at, they're appropriate. So the first is a open standard that's experienced a small hiccup in the standardization process at the W3C, which could be a good sign because the folks who opposed it are the incumbents. But the standard is called decentralized identifier. And what makes it slightly different than the crypto addressing universe, at least as I understand it right now, is that with cryptocurrencies and with NFTs, your identifier, your anchor for all of your activity is your public key or a hash of your public key. And with decentralized identifiers, there's an abstraction. There's the decentralized identifier itself, an instrument called a decentralized identifier document, and that document contains the current set of public keys associated with that particular DID. And what this abstraction does is allow persistent anchoring for much longer period of time than the lifespan of a public-private key pair. Anchoring everything to a set of public keys that's high value and you need it to persist for a long time isn't really a great idea. And I think, there's going to be kind of an awakening about the opportunity and the technical innovation that decentralized identifiers provide. Another tool that we've invented is called a verifiable credential. And this is an open standard that lets any entity say anything it wants about another entity. So this is being used to express verifiable credentials for people like in the educational credentialing space. Institutions assert what their students have accomplished with degrees and passing particular courses. You have entities asserting things about organizations. So there's a group called the Global Legal Entity Identifier Foundation that issues persistent identifiers to businesses. That this has increasingly become a requirement, this number for international trade and cross-border transactions. And then you have the identity of things and tracking things through supply chains. And so the U.S. Customs and Border Patrol is running pilot projects, more than that, I think proof of concept projects where all the paperwork associated with things crossing U.S. Customs need to present that or in time. The pilots are already obviously a starting point, present that information using a verifiable credential. And these credentials are, the verifiable part it is true. It is cryptographically signed by a particular party. Solving those large scale interoperability trust problem is a different layer of the puzzle. And there are groups like Trust over IP working on that, the set of challenges. And then the final thing that builds on this kind of like, what could we actually do with it that changes key dynamics is a protocol called Decentralized Identifier Communication, or DIDComm, that supports peer-to-peer encrypted communication. But unlike a lot of the current sort of paradigm around, secure messaging apps where you have one public-private key pair and all of your messaging happens via that one encryption pathway, is that you have separate public-private key pairs for every single connection. So this protocol potentially gives us a path to owning our own social graph. And from there, potentially having portability because it's ours, not the institutions that we happen to be interacting on. So with that, and then I just wanted to build on something that was mentioned by Adam, which is that ENS names are actually decentralized identifiers now. So I'll put a link into the chat. So that's probably the most immediate direct intersection between what he shared and what I just spoke about.
Awesome. Kaliya, thank you. That was a wonderful update on the current state of digital identity protocols and potentially where they might start to intersect a little bit with things like non-fungible tokens. You said something interesting, and I just want to dive in on this one a little bit. You said, and forgive me if I didn't get this exactly right. So I think you said tying your identity to something of, you said value, and I think you mean like an NFT that has a potentially a floating or rising value over time might be problematic. Is that?
No, that's not what I said. I
Okay,
said it's okay. It's
no, that's
okay.
why I wanted to catch that again.
I specifically was saying, so in many in the way that blockchains exchange information, you're anchoring the information to public-private key pairs. And so the thing that is on the blockchain that's your identifier for your wallet is a public key.
Mm-hmm.
Right? And so that means that it's locked to that public key, and you have to maintain control of your private keys forever.
Right.
So you may not want your university degree issued to a public key. That may not be long-term stable enough and safe enough. You want it slightly abstracted. So this decentralized identifier creates the ability to rotate the keys associated with the particular identifier. So you get kind of the best of both worlds. You get the cryptography and you get persistence longer than the lifespan of a public-private key pair.
Okay, thank you for expanding on that. I really wanted to dig into that one just a little more to make sure I understood what you were doing there. All right, so let's go ahead. We're going to make a transition. Actually, before we do the panel, because I'm going to shift it up just a little bit. Sorry, team. Let's actually bring Salim out. Kaliya, I'll have you back in just a second for the panel, so don't go anywhere. And Salim, you've heard Adam and you've heard Kaliya. I know you've been taking a pretty deep dive into the world of NFTs in a number of areas. What do you think?
Well, one of the questions I've been asking and getting answered is this a fad or are they here to stay? And it's pretty clear that they're here to stay in a pretty profound way. The thing that I find most exciting about all of this is that in Web 2, the ownership of data and objects was held with the companies. Your Twitter account is owned actually by Twitter. All the content that you provide to Facebook is actually legally owned by Facebook. And so they allow you to download a copy of it or delete it, but actually the technical ownership is there. With Web3, NFTs, etc., the ownership goes back to the individual, which is why you don't see Apple, Google, Facebook getting into it. They're like, what the hell? This is our ownership. We lose ownership here. And I think that's the most exciting part. And I think the implications of this now become really profound because we can now bestow and navigate ownership, and people can really, really own their own data. And as Kaliya talks about, their own identity. I'm fascinated by how this might unroll. I've got 100 questions, which we'll have to navigate who gets to ask what questions.
Well, we'll have anybody can ask anybody a question on the panel. That's totally fine today. And we're going to go ahead and transition.
Got 100. So
you've got 100. So I'll moderate you a little bit. Yeah. So one of the assertions that I hear frequently about the transition from Web 2 to Web 3 is it's just a transition from centralization to decentralization. And while that is true, it's certainly what you assert in that it's also the transition of ownership back to the people who are generating or originating in this case, and often is the case, the data. And I think that's absolutely fascinating. So, and when you tie that, of course, to identity, and then potentially you tie identity to NFTs or other types of public-private key pairs, I just think the number of possibilities this unlocks are astronomical. And it's not that often that we see a shift of this magnitude, especially not this fast. look how fast this has come on. The blockchain's come on, it's been 13 years or so. But when you look at just NFTs and the public awareness of them, that's like, what, 2 years? I mean, did we know what an NFT was just a couple of years? I mean, some people did, of course, but it was the general public had no idea. And it was art that pushed it forward. So you were just roaming around Art Basel. So as we bring the rest of the panel back on, let's bring Kaliya back and Adam back. What did you see in terms, Salim, as you were roaming all around Art Basel in Miami? I was telling Adam, they ran Pixel Mind Basel or Pixel Basel in Decentraland, which I visited, and that was super fun. So I'd love to maybe use that as a transition into the panel, and then we'll start to get into some of the questions. And we do have quite a few questions queued up today.